My name is Daniel Alberton. Today I will be talking about the opioid crisis in America and how decriminalizing the use of illicit drugs in America will have a better platform in combating the use of them. Well, America has a problem with drugs, it's clear. On the news you can hear about the rising amount of deaths due to abuse of opioids, whether it's prescription painkillers or something like heroin that people use. It's a really big problem and it's been on the rise for a number of years. For example, about a year ago I wrote a paper about a town in Indiana that has a problem with opioids, and the statistics were back then from the Department of Health and Human Services that there were 33,000 deaths in 2015, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's so bad. And I checked back when I was writing this and it's up to 42,000 in just a year, so it's not too good. So what I'm about to say is that decriminalizing the use of recreational drugs in the United States will provide a more effective platform for dealing with drug-related problems. And I'm to support this with the fact that changing from treating drugs as a criminal problem to treating them as a medical problem gives a better platform for beating it at the source. The execution of drug decriminalization has been shown to be successful in the past, specifically in the European country of Portugal, and programs such as needle exchanges decrease the dangers involved with drug use and lower other risks. Now, treating drug use is a medical issue. So treating drug use as a medical issue would be a better way of combating it than just throwing them in jail. So say you find an addict on the street and they have any amount of heroin, and possession of it is illegal, and instead of saying, oh, blah, 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 they're thrown in jail. And one, that doesn't help them with their problem. They're in jail, they're going to do it, if they're going through withdrawal or something, they're going to be in pain, and once they're out, they're going to go back to it. It didn't help them at all. It's not giving them any benefit to being thrown in jail. Money is being spent on keeping them in jail, and there's nothing, it's just a cycle. If they go back to jail, the cycle just keeps going. Treating it as a medical issue, however, will actually attack it at the source. Now, in the United States, as I said, there were 42,000 deaths in 2016 due to opioid misuse and overdosing. And about this year, 115 die daily due to overdoses. And these are not only from something like heroin, but from something like, just like prescription painkiller. Say you go to the doctor, you're in pain, so you take painkillers, but you get hooked, because they can be very, very addictive. Now, see, if you treat it as a medical issue, and instead provide someone who's suffering from addiction with medical help, such as like a mandatory rehabilitation or something to help with the withdrawal symptoms, it'll help them off the drug and set in motion a pathway instead of sending them back to jail. Now I got this idea from, this was executed in Portugal back in the early 2000s. So to talk about Portugal was a fascist dictatorship for most of the 20th century and was locked from the rest of the world. But when they sent many men to war, they came back and they had a serious drug problem, similar to when the United States sent their soldiers to Vietnam and everything was cheaper there, and so they came back messed up. So Portugal started having really serious drug problems because, one, the people had not been exposed to it and they didn't know the dangers. Now by the 1990s, in just the capital of Portugal alone, Lisbon, they had a population of about 500,000. 10,000 people were suffering from opioid addiction, and that's a lot. That is a lot. That is an obscene amount of people, and that's just the capital. Portugal was the worst place in Europe with these, because there were hundreds and thousands of people dying weekly, monthly because of this. And so in 2001, João Gallo, who was a drug czar and had a lot of experience with this, authored Portugal's new drug decriminalization laws that they put in place. And what these laws do is that instead of sending an addict to jail, if somebody it's still criminal to own something like heroin or have a large amount of opioids, but if they have less than a 10-day supply, they're instead evaluated by social workers whether they need treatment or not. So dealers are still sent to jail, saying that they're being cut off at the source. Of the dealers are still prosecuted for what they're doing, but the addicts are instead be evaluating if they really need help from the government. And it's only been 17 years since 2001, but in only Lisbon alone, there has been a 75% drop in drug cases. They still have just in Lisbon, they still have about 2,000 every year, which sounds like a lot, but it's 5 times lower than the average in Europe. So it's shown that this has been very effective. This has been extremely effective, and it showed that their middle ground between sending dealers to jail while still helping the addicts has been effective in not only combating the use of drugs with the people, but also helping repeat offenders get off the drug. Now, they also have other things, because with drug use such as needles, there's the problems involved with, such as dirty needles, you can get hepatitis, HIV from spread, and in the United States, there was a point where they had needle exchanges in some states, but those have been stopped. In Portugal, they do have free needle exchange, so that if people still have to use the drug, they're using it cleanly with a clean needle. And this has also brought down the spread of bloodborne viruses by approximately 95%. These statistics are quoted from NPR in a 2015 interview with João Gallo in Portugal, in Lisbon. And also a Portuguese sociologist talked about this, Nuno Capaz. They talked about how they have this in place that's been working, because it's cheaper to help people with their addiction than to incarcerate them. And implementing this in the U.S., not only the decriminalization, but also the needle exchange would help bring down the other dangers involved with the drug crisis, such as the spread of HIV and hepatitis, while also combating the continued addiction with the people. And so I feel like decriminalizing drugs in the United States decriminalizing in a way similar to Portugal would help with the issue in a way that still combats drugs, but also helps the addicts and the people. Thank you.
All right, well, Daniel, the proposition's pretty clearly identified, although decriminalization seems like it's maybe not the accurate term that you want to use. You do kind of explain the emphasis that you're trying to get us to see as being appropriate, and maybe the terminology just needs a little bit of working on. The contents of the speech, there is sort of a preview, but I didn't think that the secondary points were very clear claims. I mean, at one point, it's, we've got the experience in Portugal, and then we've got experience from needle exchanges, and that seems to be the structure that you're going to use for the speech, and it doesn't really feel as clear and directed as you want it to be. So I think that that's a little bit of a problem. The explanation of how this is supposed to work, I thought that was relatively clear. The information, the data that you have from Portugal, you cite that pretty clearly. The notion that opioids and other things are potentially problematic, I thought you conflated a little bit. I didn't think that you meant that there are 33,000 people who died in Indiana. You were just talking about the one town, and then the next thing I know, I'm hearing about a lot of people dying. I'm going, that's a lot of people dying in one town. And I realize that it's not one town that you're talking about, so you got to be a little bit careful how some of the information flows together there. The example of Lisbon is fine to illustrate what you're talking about. I do think there's a couple of presuppositions in the argument that need to be demonstrated. First of all, the notion that we do not currently treat people with drug addictions as a medical issue and instead treat them only as a criminal matter. The state of California has policies in place that are supposed to be doing that. I think a lot of states around the country have similar kinds of policies. I know personally plenty of people who have had encounters with the government as a result of drug use, and prison is not usually the first option that they get. Medical treatment is often the first option. So there's a presupposition here that this is not being done currently, and I think you need to give us a better argument that that is the case. And I think that's a little bit of a problem. Now, here's the other thing that I think is a little bit inconsistent. You tell us how people can get involved in the drug abuse and have these problems because of their medical history and medical issues, and then the way to solve it is to get them in contact with medical personnel again. I'm going, wait a second, isn't that how they got in trouble in the first place? Why is this going to be better? What is it, a different group? Is you're handing it off from one medical group to a different medical group, and that's what's going to be better? That seems like a slight inconsistency in the argument. I'm sure that there's there's an explanation for it, but it wasn't very clear here. And then the idea about the needle exchanges being successful, you kind of do default back to your example of Portugal again, because you don't really have any data about the U.S., and there's an assumption that we don't do that anymore. And again, I'm not exactly sure why you believe that that's true. So the evidence from Portugal is the stuff that you're depending on the most. You do a pretty good job citing that, but I think you need to find some more diverse information to support your point as well. Thank you.